All right. Hello, the San Antonio Express Diversity Committee welcomes you to a brown bag conversation with the San Antonio Express News writers behind Lift Every Voice. My name is Felicia Benegas. I'm one of the co-leaders of the Express News Diversity Committee. Speaking today, we have writers Taylor Pettaway and Vince Davis. This conversation will be moderated by Express News columnist Cary Clack, and Q&A will be facilitated by D&I co-leader Emily Eaton. Cary, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Felicia. And good morning, everyone, or good afternoon if you're watching from the East. And I'm looking forward to this conversation with my friends and colleagues, Taylor and Vince. Before we do anything else, Vince and Taylor, just tell everyone something briefly about yourself, where you're from, and how long you've been at the Express News.
Vince, after you.
Well, so I've been with the Express News since 1998. Started out as editorial assistant after I retired from the military, Air Force, after 22 years, and was very fortunate to, find my way to the Express News through San Antonio College newspaper, The Ranger, and it's been a great journey. Cary, you're one of my mentors. So like I always say, I was raised up at the Express News, through all the different beats, crime, obits, now to general assignments and features reporter for the Metro section. It's been a great ride.
Thanks. Taylor?
Awesome. So I'm Taylor. This will be my second year at the Express News, coming up in September. Before that, I've been at a multitude of other papers. I was at the Boston Herald in Massachusetts and the Nevada Appeal in Carson City, Nevada, and grew up in Colorado, so only used to this heat and humidity for a very short amount of time. But yeah, I've worked as a crime reporter my entire career and have been continuing it here. So this project was definitely a nice change of pace for me to work on. So that was pretty exciting.
Thanks. Moving on to the project. Vince, tell us a little bit about Lift Every Voice. What the origin, what's the purpose, and also how did y'all come about selecting these particular two subjects, Nettie Hinton and Ed Glosson, to profile?
Well, I was brought on board by Mark and my editor at the time, Didi Fuentes, to take part in this initiative that was started by Hearst, I think, a magazine, and also pulled in Hearst newspapers to feature, I think, 50 elder African Americans, along with, interviewed by Black journalists. And it's been a highlight in my career. They gave us the freedom to choose someone from San Antonio, and right off the bat, Nettie Hinton stuck out. Ever since I've been here, we've covered her in different iterations, different, causes that she's been an advocate of, and that, she just fit the bill. And then we were thinking of who else, and Ed Glosson, with him being a groundbreaking athlete during the, segregation back in the 60s, and then his time as a journalist with the San Antonio Light, and then later on with, I think, the Register. He just seemed that the two of them seemed like the right pair who could express, themselves about the history of San Antonio and relevance of Juneteenth.
Both of y'all did wonderful jobs with the stories and the interviews, and just also, I think, not just capturing them, but the times and also San Antonio. Taylor, briefly tell us about Ed. Ed
Oh my
Glosson,
goodness.
who you know is one of the most. His family is one of the most storied athletic families in San Antonio, certainly from San Antonio's east side.
Oh yeah, I could go on and on about Ed Glosson, but he, like Vince said, I mean, he really was such a trailblazer, him and his family in San Antonio, especially in the world of athletics. And, you know, I think especially for, you know, black men especially, you know, athletics is a huge part of our culture, you know, and our identity and things like that. And so, you know, getting to speak with Ed about that, I think was such a huge thing because, I mean, it really truly sports it plays a huge component for Black Americans. And, you know, for him to be such a trailblazer, you know, him and his brothers set records. They went on to be, you know, these massive like world stars in track and football and all sorts of things. And Ed himself was an absolute hoot. I thoroughly enjoy every time I get to speak with him. He is crazy and silly and, you know, super down to earth. Will talk the ear off of you for sure. But, you know, he had just so many incredible stories that he was sharing. And, you know, not even just about race and things like that, but, you know, I heard stories about Mean Joe Green and, you know, all these people that have gone on to have these like massive professional careers that they grew up playing football with in the fields. And yeah, I just you know, Ed is an amazing guy, and he does a lot. I think like Vince said, you know, he worked for the Light, for the Register, he was a mortician, he played college football. I mean, the man has done anything and everything at this point. And, you know, getting to speak with him honestly felt like getting a page out of a history book. It really did. So it was a great time. And, you know, I'm looking forward to now as connecting with Ed in the future again.
Just a quick question about y'all's process from the time of your first interviews with Ed, with Nettie, until you turned your first draft in. How long did that take?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I think that from the time that we spoke to Mark and Dee Dee, that same day I called Nettie on the phone. And I think it was like that same day she's like, talk to me. So that day, I would say it would take probably about a week and a half in total. You know, talking to her, we had to rearrange the photo shoot because of the backdrop that they wanted, and we worked all that out. So yeah, I would say about a week and a half, but it was fluid. There was, you know, there wasn't a hitch. She was very amenable to whatever we wanted, you know, or wanted to set up for her. And it was really a great experience for us, for the team. Have to mention, you know, that Billy Calzada, the photojournalist who videoed the interviews, was amazing. I mean, it was almost, you know, he also drew out, you know, stories from Nettie. So I had to give him a salute for his help with the project.
Taylor?
I was gonna say, I think I followed a similar timeline to Vince. I think from, you know, first contact to about first draft was about a week and a half. Similarly, I got a hold of Ed, I think that afternoon or the next afternoon, and was able to set up an interview for a few days later. And so that gave me a couple of days to really focus in on the story and figure out what pieces of Ed that I wanted to try to highlight with this. But yeah, I agree with Vince. You know, if it weren't for Billy, this project definitely wouldn't be half as great as it was. I mean, he really brought everything, you know, visually to light, and, you know, his videos were great, his photos were amazing, and yeah, I mean, he was just such a great partner in that interview room. And definitely, I mean, he was a big big partner in this project. And I agree with Vince. I'm very thankful that he also was included in this with us.
Billy is immensely gifted. Both Ed and Nettie seemed amenable to talk to both of you, but was there any hesitance on the part of either one of them about talking about a particular subject or sharing a story, or were they just pretty open as they seem to be in your stories?
There was nothing off limits, you know. I mean, you know, if you're familiar with Nettie Hinton, you know, she's not shy. She says what's on her mind. It doesn't matter what quarter, you know, I mean, what population she's with. She's just very, very down to earth and very resolute in her beliefs, you know. So listening to her talk about, you know, growing up during segregation, listening to her talk about her father taking her hand and walking her to vote for the first time and paying her poll tax was like, I've read about it and I've researched it, but it's the first time I've actually talked to someone who actually had participated in that process, which was, I'm sorry, still it is kind of mind blowing for me, you know, and everything with the Woolworth, you know, protest. I was thanks to Scott's, you know, in-depth reporting, I was able to get some background beforehand, and you know, with questions to ask her. But yeah, there was nothing off limits with her. She, you know, and then the backstory, the history of her grandmother and Juneteenth, it almost was like just, you know, everything just kind of coalesced together. I mean, she didn't have to reach to talk about Juneteenth, you know, it's part of her history, part of her family history. So it made things really a lot easier. Just it was a matter, if anything, it was just about what to leave in and what to take out. I mean, the chronology is just like, okay, as a writer, she gave you so much, she was very giving, so it made the writing process, you know, very easy.
Taylor?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I have to echo Vince as well. Ed was a complete open book. You know, I mean, he, you know, especially with things too, you know, I mean, sometimes you go into some of these things where you're dealing with sensitive subjects, you know, race obviously is a big issue still, you know, and so sometimes it's hard to imagine how people react when you ask them certain questions. And so, you know, it's, especially for me, you know, Ed was basically a stranger, and I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna ask this poor man, you know, about some of the most like torrid moments of his life. And, you know, and he was totally fine, you know, gave me every story with grace, never, you know, wasn't comfortable, made me feel uncomfortable with it. It was just such an open and honest conversation about, you know, the things that he grew up with. And, you know, Vince is right. I mean, there's so many things of these stories that, you know, you hear about in terms of history, you know, in terms of, you know, you see it in a history book, you watch it on a documentary or things like that, and, you know, you think, oh, that was so long ago, you know, I mean, you almost slightly can't imagine, you know, what it's like to go through some of these events, and then to hear, you know, the way they describe these, and, you know, to hear Ed talk about how it was totally normal for a coach to tell them, you know, to keep their helmets on, you know, full time on the field because fans would throw things at them, or, you know, how it was, you know, nonchalantly everyone would yell the N-word from the stands and things like that. And, you know, and it's sometimes you feel so disconnected in a way from some of these things because they're not as apparent today. And you know, and yeah, to have to ask Ed about these kinds of things, it was definitely scary a little bit, but you know, yeah, I mean, he took it with grace, and he never, you know, I never saw any hesitancy. He never seemed like he wanted to skirt over a story. He just barreled right through it, and, you know, I got every detail of it. And So it was good. It was great. Yeah.
Talk specifically about the football game between with Curvo Tyree, the first. I mean, that's kind of his, of all the many things he's done, it's one of his links to history, playing that first integrated high school football game. But yet at the same time, doesn't seem to have been really concerned about the historic part of it. He was just concerned about the game itself.
Truthfully, that was so on brand for Ed too. It makes me laugh afterwards. But yeah, I mean, I thought it was amazing when I was talking to him. You know, when Vince first presented Ed to me as a source, you know, that was kind of the shtick that we went off of like, okay, like this is kind of the hook, you know. And so that initially was what I was hoping to center my piece around. You know, and it was one of my first questions I asked Ed, and yeah, just even talking to him, you could tell he was like, it was a game, you know. And I was like, you know, it wasn't just a game, like this was huge, like tell me more about it. And yeah, and you know, instead of telling me, you know, the significance of the game, I, you know, got the scores, and I, you know, got the names of all of the guys on the field of this team and all the guys on the name of, you know, on the field of this team. And it was like, to him, I mean, it was just more of a football game, and it really truly was. And you know, and even when I would press him about it, you know, he was like, oh, it's, you know, it's whatever. We played football games before, we played them after, you know, they were still my same teammates. You know, there's a quote in there, you know, paraphrasing, because I don't remember the exact, but it basically was, you know, we're all going through the same hell. We're, you know, we're on the same team. We're doing the same stuff. So race doesn't matter. And, you know, it's so interesting with something like that when it's like, you know, to us, we see it as, it's like, well, race does matter. You know, that was a huge turning point for San Antonio history. And for these guys, you know, they were just playing their senior year game. You know, they were just trying to make it through another Friday night. And, you know, and so, yeah, it was really fascinating to speak with Ed about that for sure. Because he just, you know, to him, it wasn't, you know, this big changing point. And, you know, I honestly, I think it's good, and it's not in a way of, you know, it kind of shows that it's like, sometimes these things just really don't matter in a good way. You know, whereas it was more based off of skill and, you know, the team and the game and things like that, you know, things that I think a lot of Black Americans wish things were focused on more. Whereas on the flip side, that all, you know, it also was a huge thing. So it was really interesting to see how, I guess, insignificant in a way that form of it was to Ed.
Is there anything that in your interviews with Ed, with Nettie, that surprised you, or maybe surprised you about San Antonio? I mean, Vince, you're from Nebraska, Taylor from Colorado,
Yeah.
and like San Antonio, not well, I mean, Omaha's there, but not a significant African American population. But at the same time, you know, it doesn't matter what part of the country you live in and what city you live in, the experiences tend to be the same. But was there anything that you heard from I mean, Vince, I think you were more surprised just because, you know, Nettie was someone who actually went with her father as he paid her poll tax. But was there anything about their experiences being Black in San Antonio that specifically caught your attention?
You know, I wish I could say yeah, but, you know, but after having covered her, you know, interviewed her over the years, I guess the only thing that probably not really surprised me, but you know, kind of just caught my attention is just her ongoing commitment. You know, at her age, you know, I mean, so she has a hard time. It's kind of difficult for her to get around these days, but you know, when the rally started at Travis Park, you know, for George Floyd, if she could have marched with them, she would have, but she couldn't. because she has difficulty getting around. So she drives in her car nearby, and she's rolling down the window and yelling out, shouting support as they march by. There's no one else I've talked to that has done that, And I think it all stems from the fact that, like Taylor had brought up, with Ed, and it's not that they understand what's going on, but it's like they were raised and they lived in neighborhoods where, these folks like go out and do what you're supposed to do. They're like, act like you've been here before, when you go out in public, you represent yourself, you represent your community, you represent your family. And like she said, even during the segregated, during segregation, she was like, we weren't missing out on anything. We knew who we were, And so when they went out, even in the neighborhood and outside the neighborhood, they knew how to conduct themselves, like you said with Grace Taylor, as, in the face of sometimes, these odds, these demeaning odds. They could be demeaning, but to them, the majority of folks went out and did what they had to do within the confines of the times, And but even so, even with that, they were still fighting, for equal rights. So I think just the fact that she's still out there today is the thing that really, impressed me or struck me.
I would say for me, going through this story, like you said, Cary, I'm from Colorado. I grew up in pretty much an all white neighborhood and things like that. So like to me, race was always pretty prevalent, just because, I was always, the one Black kid in my entire high school and things like that. And so I think I was surprised hearing Ed's story about, speaking with both Ed and his brother Clyde, just about how much racism they still faced. Just because I would see in a place like San Antonio that is significantly diverse from, anywhere that I grew up in, I would have almost thought that would have been not as prevalent, just because, you may not, obviously they're not Hispanic and things like that. And obviously San Antonio is a large Latino population, but, at least you have people that somewhat look like you, in ways. So I think that was kind of what was surprising to me was they, were still telling stories of how, there were groups of white people that, were trying to attack them with bats when they went to go get a hamburger, or, that they couldn't sit in certain spots at the Majestic Theater and like things like that. And so I think for me, that was a little bit surprising, where it was like, wow, in a place that has so much diversity, these very blatant forms of racism were still, such a huge occurrence. And I think, yeah, I think that was the most compelling thing, or one of the most compelling things for me while I spoke with Ed.
Vince, you talked about Nettie's ongoing commitment, and the title of this project is "Lift Every Voice," from the Negro National Anthem, "Lift Every Voice and Sing." And the last line of the first verse is, "Let us march on until victory is won." And I thought it was interesting that in both of your stories, in fact, it was in the headlines. You had Nettie saying, "We still have to fight," and you had Ed saying, "Don't quit." So just the underlying assumption that the struggle continues. I'm not going to ask, why are these stories important? Because they are. But ultimately, who are the stories that you told, the stories that Nettie and Ed tell? Who is it most important for? For those who are telling it, for those and who have lived it, or for those who don't know it?
I think it's for those that don't know it. those who have lived it, and having talked to Nettie and other African American leaders in the past, like I said, they lived it. They know it. They pass it on to their family members and neighbors and things. But I think hopefully people were able to glean something from it. Those who may not be familiar with Nettie Hinton, Juneteenth, or her experience, hopefully someone will read it, about Ed, because I know there's probably a lot of folks who, didn't know anything about this game, back in 69?
66.
66?
I believe
And
so.
yeah, because when I first heard it, I was like, what, But just hopefully people who are not familiar with, Nettie, maybe hopefully they came away with, a better understanding, about their city, especially for San Antonians. Hopefully they came away with a little something about, San Antonio and their history, because it is their history too, So hopefully that helped them with that.
Yeah, I mean, stories like these are important obviously they're important for, the storyteller because, Vince and I talked about it before, but, at some point, these older generations, they're not going to be around for much longer, and so without having people hear these stories and share these stories, I mean, their tales just get completely lost, what would have happened, had something happen to Ed before, Vince was introduced to him, and simultaneously myself, we might not have heard about this game. We might not have known that this had gone on and these things happened. And, and so I think they are very important for the storytellers, but likewise the community. I mean, I think in a community like San Antonio, where people are very close, they're very neighborly, I think the success of this project, especially exemplified that, people just want to know about their neighbors. They want to know about the people that they live with and they're surrounded with, and, how people have interesting stories like this. Because, you might not have ever known, had you passed Nettie or Ed on the street, that, these two people would have played such a huge part in history without a series like this. And so, and just it's important for people to understand too, how far we've come, but also how much farther that we still have. We're talking about this game that was played in the 60s. I mean, my parents were born in the 60s, so to me it's like that's shocking that you think that these things are so far in the past, and we've come so far, and I'm like, I'm barely even a second generation of dealing with stuff like this, or dealing with after desegregation and things like this. And so I think it's so much more eye-opening for people to see too, because like we said earlier, you read these things in history books, you hear about these things on podcasts or documentaries or things like that, but then when you actually hear these stories straight from the horse's mouth, it's so much more empowering, because it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, like there shouldn't be people who we know and we're still able to speak with, who have dealt with these crazy things and dealt with this segregation and racism and things like that, but there still are, and so I think it's important for people to see that, and to be able to really visualize something like that and go, wow, like I can't believe that this is something that we can still talk about.
Beautifully said. And Vince, when you and I first met, we didn't have these gray beards. So doesn't it make you feel wonderful to hear a colleague talk about her parents being born in the same decade that we were born?
Oh, yeah.
Thanks, Taylor. Yeah.
You both look great, though. So
Bless you.
Thank you. Wasn't fishing for that, but and it's also important to state that your profiles, your stories could have been, they didn't have to be told around Juneteenth, didn't have to be told during Black History Month, didn't have to be told around the MLK holiday. I think that's something traditionally newspapers, media in general have been faulty of, is putting the focus on Black communities and Black subjects during these very restricted times. But I honestly feel that there's a lot of it comes because of what happened last year, that we're moving away from that. So I don't know what I'm at. I think I'm making more of an editorial comment than a asking a question, that it's that these stories would have been just as relevant if they had run in November or if they had run in March.
Well, I have to say that I think increasingly since I've been at the Express News, there's never been like, okay, like every paper, yeah, everybody wants, coverage around MLK, holiday, Black History Month, Juneteenth, but it's the same thing also for Cinco de Mayo.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that at the Express News. And I have to say that, I think for the most part, since I've been there, we try to have this coverage throughout the year.
Mm-hmm.
I know just last year alone, man, in the column, San Antonio Stories, we did Honey's Place, out in East Bexar County. These, these generations of African Americans who ride horses, groom horses, out there, and I had no idea that they even existed, that neighborhood existed out there. And just within the column itself, try to, have a diverse roster, if you will. But I've never felt inhibited to just, or limited to coverage since I've been at the paper, So, I mean, we have featured profiles of African Americans throughout the year, or events and things like that. And try really hard not to make it just like a 3 times a year type of thing, and that's always been our goal and mission. And I think, everybody's behind us. I've never been told no. No one's ever told me, no, you can't do that story.
Right.
And if anything, editors have helped me flesh out stories, maybe focus, if you will, on what the story I'm trying to tell, So I think for us, my feeling is that the paper, no, it's not just a, MLK, Black History Month, Juneteenth thing. It's, for me, it's about how, what stories can we tell throughout the year? And if so, if you find it, go tell it.
I agree.
That's been my experience.
I agree.
I would say I agree with Vince. I feel like compared to most, and this is the third major paper that I've worked for, and definitely compared to the others, the Express News, I think, does a really good job about trying to get into the different communities, as less of like the PR stunt of, around specific holidays and things like that. But, and I think it's great because, these stories are important year round. Like Cary said, we could have told either of these stories at any point of the year, and I think that they would have still been just as successful, would have been definitely just as interesting. I don't think it devalues these stories to, do it in December or April or, any other time that's typically associated around specific diversity holidays, because it's obviously, but the people in these, in these communities and in our communities, they're here 24/7. We don't just shuttle in a bunch of Black people in Black History Month and then take them right away. They've lived here for generations, for years. And so, it should be our job to to showcase that all year and all the time, because I mean, great things are happening and people are doing great things, and just because it's a Black community or a Hispanic community or things like that, doesn't mean that they are only important during certain points of the year. And so it definitely, I hope that as racial conversations continue to happen in our society, I hope a lot more publications and things like that really start to take that to heart and get on board with stuff like that, because it's important year round. I mean, there's no reason why we shouldn't be featuring stories like this all the time.
I agree, and I sound like a homer, but I do think that our paper, as you both say, has been getting better at that. It's been good at that for a while, and I also think that on the part of readers and on the part of people who have legitimate criticisms against any hometown newspaper media outlet, when they do try to change and try to tell more stories, there comes a point when you can't always hope they're passed against them. Because if you're criticizing them for not covering enough, and then they start to cover enough, but then you criticize them because they used to, then you're kind of defeating the point. But Emily, do you have any questions from the audience?
Yes, we do. So we had a couple submitted questions, and also if anyone has questions after hearing this conversation or anything they want to add, feel free to either drop it in the chat or you can take yourself off mute. I have two that I'm going to start with, and then we'll go from there. One of the first questions we had was, after this project, what other kinds of projects like this would you like to see published in the San Antonio Express News?
So actually, ironically, Vince and I had been talking about this almost, I think, as soon as this project wrapped up. We happened to just be meeting in person for the building tour last week, and both of us were just really talking about how we really want to continue something like this. Vince had been telling me, years ago, there was a series that the Express News had put on featuring the Latina population in San Antonio. And it literally was almost pretty much like the Juneteenth spread of just stories upon stories of different community members from San Antonio, of all sorts of different people, from grade schoolers to the elderly to incarcerated to activists to all of these things. And it was just this whole spectrum of different people in our community that, similar to this project, you might not have known these amazing stories out of. And so Vince and I had been talking about seeing if there's a way that we could almost revamp something like that into the Black community, whether that focuses on Black women, especially because we know, even from our own surveys in the Express News, Black women feel like they are marginalized and not heard, and are very low on the totem pole of society, basically. And so we had a conversation, what if we could highlight that and make people not feel invisible, and make people not feel like that they don't have a voice and they're not seen in this community, because they are. So hint, hint, Mark and Randy, in case anyone wants to do something.
Love that idea.
But yeah, I think, again, the success of this series has shown that people are interested in these types of things, and they're interested in hearing them. And, I don't see a reason as, why we couldn't continue, doing work similar to this.
Yeah, I agree. I can't recall how many years ago we did the Latinas series, but we had a great time working on it. It just came out of discussions with Ken Manhuey, the photojournalist, and I were at lunch, and we were talking about, doing something different. And for some reason, we came up with the idea that we wanted to hear the voices that maybe we didn't see a lot in the paper. And we came up with Latinas. And we worked with the Metro editor at the time, Veronica Flores. And we covered everything from grade school, quinceañeras, just, mothers, working mothers, military veterans. I mean, you name it. We covered it. It must have been about 30 folks, and we did it on our spare time, you know, Kinnaman and I, and then we were able to pull in Elena Ayala and Melissa Renteria to help us out. And this is before the, you know, online really was, you know, as big as it is now. So I think if it was something that was run now, it would really get a great response. And so African-American women is, you know, one population out there that maybe we could look into delving into, you know. And there's a host of others too. So that's something maybe we'll have a chance to talk to everybody about and see what they think.
Love the idea.
That was our shameless plug.
Another submitted question that we have, do you think the Express News has given people of color reporters enough of a platform? If not, how are you or how should others try to overcome those obstacles?
Oh, go ahead, Vince.
Go ahead, man.
Oh, thank you. I would personally say, in my experience here, I believe that the Express News has given reporters of color a good platform. You know, like Vince mentioned earlier, I don't think I've ever been told no on a story. You know, I've never had an editor say I couldn't do something or try something new or things like that. You know, I mean, I think even, you know, a project like this, you know, and we were kind of talking about this yesterday while we were doing our run through for this brown bag. It's like, you know, for me, I'm a crime and breaking news reporter on the digital team right now. So typically I probably wouldn't be, you know, one of the first picks for a project like this. But I was so grateful that, you know, Randy and Mark gave me the opportunity to do so, you know, and I absolutely loved it. I mean, I haven't written a profile piece in so long, and, you know, and so I think that honestly speaks to, you know, where the Express News puts their value in reporters of color, because, you know, a lot of other markets, they took student interns, they took college kids of color and things like that. And our paper, you know, and they all did Q&A versions. So theirs weren't, you know, I mean, they were legitimate stories, but they weren't like full-length stories like Vince and I had the opportunity to do. Whereas ours, you know, they were like, hell no, you know, our reporters have experience, they're great, like, we're going to let them run with it how they want to run with it. And, you know, I think that speaks volumes, truthfully, you know, that they clearly had faith and, you know, value in their reporters of color. And, you know, I think with somewhere like here, I think, and I hope that, you know, our fellow diverse colleagues, I you know, I just hope that they find the voice, you know, and just ask, because I think that they will be rewarded, you know, for that. And I think that as long as they don't stay silent and, you know, really are vocal about what they want to do and, you know, with their career, especially at this paper, you know, I have faith that they'll, you know, have the backup that they need from the higher ups. So.
I agree. You know, like I said, over the years, like I said, I've never been told no. I've always had the access to go out and find stories. And I think because of the work that, you know, that we've been able to do along with our colleagues, we get a lot of stories sent to us. You know, I had never heard of the Baptist settlement. I didn't know what a Baptist settlement was, you know, and because of some of the stories that we've written, a woman who was born there came up and shared her experience, and that became a story. The same thing with Honey's Place out in East Bexar County. It came from a source at the funeral home who called and said, "Hey, man, I think this is a good story." but that's because I think we've been out. I think it's proof of the fact that all of us, the newsroom proper, I mean, not just me, but, my colleagues have been out there telling these stories in different zip codes, and I think that, I've been very fortunate to have folks email or call and they've panned out, So I think the paper's doing about, is really putting their force behind, us finding these stories.
Great. We have another submitted question. Vincent Taylor, were you the only reporters working on this project? And is there someone in particular that you would like to write about?
For this project, for the Express News, we were, like I said earlier, this, and like Vince said, this was a project across, I think, all of the Hearst markets. So all of the publications, the newspapers, the magazines. And so in conjunction, Vince and I weren't the only ones, but we were the only ones from San Antonio who submitted stories to this overall project. As far as, stories looking at, I think, kind of what we talked about earlier, I think, just getting to share some more of these feature stories and, like I said, I love talking with Ed. I would love to talk to some more of his, colleagues and teammates and things like that, even just speaking with a few of them for the Lift Every Voice project, even they had such fascinating stories, and it's like there's such a chain reaction that I honestly think that you could just go down the line, and keep just talking to people and just keep seeing, because, everyone really does have an interesting story, and, especially from that time, and especially in San Antonio. I mean, it's a fascinating city. It's filled with fascinating people. And so, I think if we could just even do a little bit to hammer into that would be great.
Yeah, and I know, Cary, you're familiar. I think first time I read about this family was one of your columns, your older columns. It's a Sutton family.
God, yeah.
Charles Andrews was very, helpful with the quote for Nettie's story. And just talking to him on the phone as he was, talking about Nettie, it's a whole nother sector, a whole nother section, another, another profile that's, I think, readers would learn from. I mean, his background, his family's background, their entrepreneurial, history, and the fact that, the Sutton, if I'm not, correct me, Cary, Sutton children all had college degrees. Is that right?
College degrees and higher.
And higher, right? And Percy Sutton,
Percy was Malcolm's attorney and owned the Apollo. It's in my opinion, it's the most accomplished family to come out of San Antonio. It's one of the most accomplished families this nation has produced.
So I figure, if we were able to talk to Mr. Andrews, we would get a whole another chapter of San Antonio history, not just the East Side, but San Antonio history. So I've got him on my list to maybe reach out to and talk to.
Well, that is it for our submitted questions. I'll ask one question that comes to mind for me. And so if there's anyone else that wants to send me a question or maybe go off mute, you can go right after this. Otherwise, we can wrap up. I'm curious, you sort of touched on this a little bit before, but I'm curious what other reporters and editors can learn from the success of this project.
I think what other editors and reporters can learn is that, saying this in the best way possible, but, I think not everything has to have this major news hook, and I think especially the world of journalism right now, we always feel like everything has to either be first, it has to be the greatest, it has to be the show-stopping, sensational, like amazing, out of the ordinary, super crazy story. And I think that there comes to a point where we forget that part of, you know, our jobs and part of the reasons why we went into this profession is to be a storyteller. You know, and I think that's exactly what this project reignites, is that, you know, it shows reporters and editors that like people are interested in just reading a profile and hearing a feature and things. And, you know, it doesn't have to be this like massively crazy, you know, wild story. And it's like, I think that's definitely something that we could learn moving forward, is, you know, people sometimes are just genuinely interested in people. And, you know, and that's our job as journalists, is to bring these stories about, is to, you know, share pieces of the community that people may not know about before. You know, so I definitely think that it shows that we can have success just doing, you know, simple stories, you know, like this.
Great.
Yeah, I agree with Taylor. You know, the one thing that maybe folks could, and I'm sure most folks are doing it, but maybe even more so, is just to, you know, get outside of our comfort zones, you know, and have lunch in 78207, you know, or, I mean, when you go to have lunch, you can go, you know, that's one of the things the mentors always talk to us about. So, and, you know, cold calls, you know, sometimes people are like, well, you know, got to make an appointment. No, just, you can go knock on the door and they can say yay or nay, stop in, explain to who you are and talk to them. And I don't, with the pandemic kind of put a hold on that, but that was one of my one of the things I learned from the folks back in the day, you know. So it was even a copy editor who told me that. You know, he's like, you have the license to go and stop in any neighborhood you want to and just immerse yourself. If you see something that, you know, catches your attention, stop and check it out. And that's and I took his advice and not just on the east side, but the west side, south side, and north side. And it's come up with quite a few stories, you know. So I would say just maybe, lean into that a little bit, you know, try to, no matter what your beat is, you know, just maybe lean into that. And you can find these Nettie Hintons and, Ed Glossons out there, you know.
Well, thank you both. And thank you, Cary, for all of your time and for sharing this with us.
Thank you, Cary. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Oh, thank y'all. Y'all were great.
And one
Emily?
thing we want to just sort of end this conversation with is we sort of wanted to open it up for everyone else. If you have any story ideas that sort of can highlight the diversity of San Antonio, to either drop them in the chat or we can just like hang out and talk, because we'd love to hear your story ideas. Just like Vince was saying, I mean, that's how great stories come to light, is from checking in with our neighbors and checking in with our colleagues. So thank you everyone for coming. If you have any story ideas,
I think
stick
Mark
around.
has
Oh, sorry.
Hey, Emily.
Yeah.
Hey, Emily. Thank you for organizing this and putting this together. It was really great to listen to Cary and Taylor and Vincent kind of talk about how this project came together. And I just wanted to thank Vincent and Taylor for jumping in and doing this on top of your day jobs, so to speak, to take this on. And also Billy Calzada. One of the really great features of this project was that they really put a lot of high production values around it. So Billy, Vince, I think you saw that kind of shooting and reshooting the video, and they had a particular backdrop that they wanted to use and a style of lighting that will be consistent across all the papers.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love the way that it ennobled the people, Nettie and Ed Glosson, how their character came through in those photographs because of the simplicity, the starkness of that backdrop. I mean, I've seen a lot of pictures of Nettie Hinton. That was a beautiful picture of her. That was the centerpiece of that. And Ed Glosson too, that spirit of his, of insouciance in the face of great difficulty
Mhm.
and youthfulness,
Yes. Yes.
even in his later years. So thank you so much for being part of it. I thought it was really a great thing to do, and I really took to heart what Taylor said about, you don't need kind of a reason to write this story when people like these two subjects, what they've been through, just to try to exist, the difficulties that they had to face just to exist in the world and try to pursue their normal life. It's just enough to sit back and listen to it. Let them talk in a Q&A format, or you shaped it into stories that were very effective. But I think that's right. We don't need big reasons why it's relevant. It's very relevant. The unfinished business of race in this country is as big a story as we will ever face as we'll ever write about in our careers.
Amen.
And so just the simplicity of the approach, I thought was very powerful to listen to what people had to deal with.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to work with Taylor and Billy and all the online folks. Really appreciate it. It was a highlight of my career. I'm sure Taylor's career too. And we look forward to finding more stories, to tell in the same vein. So thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you, Vince.
I would say I have to echo that as well. I think that this was probably one of my favorite stories that I've written in my career, and it was a great jumpstart back into a little bit different writing style for me than what I've been used to the last few years. And actually, Vince, I'm glad you mentioned the digital, because I know Angela, she's on the call. I know she played a big part in putting together the actual digital aspects of everything. So
Thank you,
thank you, Angela. It looked beautiful.
Appreciate it.
And it was such a great and eye-opening project. I mean, I think for me, it really, I think it was one of those things that really revamped my reasons for wanting to be in this career and, wanting to keep through with these things, is to get to tell, stories like that, and getting to be a part of something like this was amazing. I literally happy cried when the spread came out. So
it was beautiful. Yeah,
it was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
Well, good to catch up with you all.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Everybody be careful.
Guys.
All right.
Thank you,
y'all.
everyone, for joining
Thank
us. Keep an eye out for a post survey just to get some feedback if you'd like to see more of these conversations and your opinion on everything. So thank you, everyone who was able to come. A recording should be available later this week.
Thank y'all.
Bye.
Thank y'all
Thank
so
you.
much.
Bye.
Thank you.